Good day. So in today's topic, we will be discussing sampling techniques or strategies in quantitative and qualitative methods. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to define sampling in quantitative and qualitative research, describe the procedures in using various quantitative and qualitative sampling approaches, and plan appropriate sampling techniques or strategies that you will utilize in your research. Before we proceed, let us define the following. Sample, a group of individuals, items, or events that represent the characteristics of the larger group. Population is the larger group from which the sample is drawn. And lastly, sampling is the process of selecting a sample. So in a research study, testing a sample, especially in quantitative study, can allow the researcher to make inferences about the performance of the larger group, which is known as the population. So the process of selecting a sample is known as the sampling. So sampling in quantitative data. So the goal of this is to find a representative sample. So how can we find? So first, define the population. For example, the population is the students of Primsu. So for example, we have 5,000 students and you are the only researcher, isa mo lang. So next is select a random sample. Okay? Doon sa buong population na yun, seselect ka lang ng mangilan-ngilan. Ayun yung tinatawag nating sample. Pero dapat randomly sila. Next, determine the sample size. Ilan ba yung sample? Ilan ba yung representative na kukunin mo to represent the entire population? Okay? Next, avoiding sampling error and bias. Of course, that's given. So, and lastly, select a non-random sample. So, maraming non-random samples and I will give you those formulas later on. So, why do we only need samples compared to population? Because, for example, yung population is 5,000. You cannot get the whole 5,000. Napakarami nun. Kaya you will only need representatives of that population. Kasi hindi feasible, di ba? Hindi feasible at hindi kailangan yung buong population. Aside sa marami yun, mahirap pang kunin yun kung scattered yung population interest mo. That's why you are only aiming for samples that are generalizable to the population. Okay. Now, kanina pa natin binabanggit yung population. So, let's try to define it. So, for example, this is a population. All elementary pupils in the Philippines, di ba? All elementary. That is your subject, the elementary pupils of the Philippines. Next, all gifted elementary pupils in Zambales. All grade 3 pupils in San Marcelino, Zambales who have visual impairments. So as you could see, the population is all the subjects in that specific local. Ayun tinatawag natin population. So populations may vary, may be any size and may cover almost any geographical area. So the entire group of interest to the researcher is rarely available. So target population versus accessible population. For example, di ba? Sabi mo dito, all elementary pupils in the Philippines, pero ang kukunan mo lang is one province in all the regions. Di ba? O kaya naman, all gifted elementary pupils in Zambales, pero ang kukunan mo lang is 1 or 2 schools per districts or 1 school per district. Diba? O kaya 1 school per municipality. Then sa school na yun, sample lang din ang kukunin mo. Okay. So next are the 4 basic techniques for selecting a random sample. So we have simple random, stratified sampling, cluster sampling, and systematic sampling. So the following random samples are this following 4 random samples are probability sampling. Okay, so these sampling techniques permits the researcher to specify the probability or chance that each member of that population will be selected for the sample. Kaya tayo gumagamit ng techniques. So each techniques require the same basic steps. So identify the population, determine the required sample size, and select the sample, which are these 4. So first, for the 4 basic techniques is the simple random. So simple random sampling is the process of selecting a sample in such a way na lahat ng individuals in that defined populations ay may equal, diba, and individual chance to be selected to be a sample. Now, the selection of the sample is completely out of researcher's control. So, kaya ibig sabihin nun na lahat yan ay may pare-parehas na probability na ma-select, makuha, ay mapili. So, kung paano napili yung isa, hindi yun nakaka-apekto kung paano mapipili yung iba. Ayun yung tinatawag nating simple random. Yung stratified sampling naman is a method, di ba? Para masigurado mo na makukuha mo yung desired mong representative of different subgroups. Diba? So in other words, some populations can be subdivided into subgroups. Yung subgroups na yun ay tinatawag nating strata. Yan. Makikita niyo naman. Halimbawa, ito yung entire population, ito yung entire classroom. Diba? Yung subgroups, pinili-pili mo sila. Yung mga subgroups na yun, yung tinatawag nating strata. Ngayon, sa stratified sampling, diba? It involves strategic selecting of participants from the subgroups. So, out of all the participants in that subgroups, diba, you will choose strategically from those. Kaya kung makikita nyo dito sa strata, diba, na bawasan pa sila. Kasi ito lang yung napili ni researcher out of the subgroups. Okay. So, when the researcher's goal is to compare the behavior of the participants from different subgroups of the population, so, stratified sampling yung pinakamagandang gawin. Yan. So, here in cluster sampling naman, it is a method na kung saan kinukuha natin yung buong grupo. Diba? Yung intact na groups. Hindi tayo namimili ng individual randomly dun sa grupo na yon. For example, ang quantitative research is knowing the least mastered competencies in grade 10 physics. So, ang kukunin doon is yung buong klase, buong grade 10 na klase na kumukuha ng physics. Diba? Why? Kasi isang grupo yun. They have the same characteristics. And what is that characteristics? They are all grade 10 and they are taking physics. So, yon. Tinatawag natin cluster sampling. Kasi dun sa, for example, yun nga yung research, list mastered competencies, hindi naman pwedeng pumili lang tayo ng 10 dun sa section na yun, tapos 10 na naman sa kabilang section, tapos 10 na naman sa kabilang section. Tapos ang pinili lang natin matatalino. Hindi. Mostly, talaga, pag ganyan yung studies, isang buong grupo na yung kinukuha. So, systematic sampling, it is a sampling which every nth individual is selected from the list. So, for example, we have a random list here. Diba? So, for example, 100 students. Ang dito sa systematic sampling, every 5th student will be selected. 5, 10, 20, 25, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, di ba? Yun yung sinasabi natin, systematic sampling. You are getting the nth number in that random population or random samples. For example, every third, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, yun yung magiging sample natin. So, how large your sample be? So, kapag napakarami ng population, mas lumiliit yung percentage in getting the sample. For example, the entire population is 28,000. 28,000 yung population. So, dahil ganun kalaki yung sample, mas maliit yung percentage. Kasi kung 10% mo yung 28,000, kahit 10% lang yun, 2,800 pa rin yun, napakarami pa rin. And kung 5% naman, di ba, 1,400, marami pa rin. Kaya the more na lumalaki yung population, mas bumababa yung percentage. For example, kung 100,000 yung population, kung 10% yun, 10,000, napakalaki. Kahit nga 1,000, alimbawa 100,000, tas 1% lang yung sample na gusto, 1,000 pa rin yun. Malaki pa rin. Kaya baka may possibility, lumit pa. Pero depende. So, yun. So, kung small naman yung populations, for example, the population is 100, mostly, kinukuha na yon yung whole 100 as the sample. Okay. Kung ang population naman is 500, so pwede naman ng 50% lang yung kuning sample para maging 250. So, yon. Next is selecting a non-random sample. So, madalas natin itong ginagawa kasi napakadali. Hindi nakaka-stress. Very accessible, very convenient, di ba? So, ang tawag natin dito is non-random sample. So, we have 3 here. Convenient sampling, purposive sampling, and quota sampling. So, kapag sinabi natin convenient sampling, it is referred to as accidental sampling or haphazard sampling. Diba? So, ito yung mga respondents na kinuha mo or pinili mo dahil sila lang yun nandoon. Sila lang yung available that time. At sila lang yung available sa lugar na yun. Kaya, okay, sila na. Sige, ito na. Diba? Non-random yun. Kasi ikaw mismo yung namili eh. Sila lang yung available doon. Pag sinabi naman natin purposive sampling, also referred to as judgment sampling, is the process of selecting a sample that is believed to be a representative of given population. For example, purposive sampling. Ito ay non-random din kasi ikaw as a researcher yung namili sa kanya. 'Di ba? Ay, siguro ano siya to. For example, ang inaano natin is sa ATM, diba? Ay siguro aware siya to sa ATM. Ay siguro may ATM siya to. Diba? Kaya purpose of sampling. We assume that they are belong to that population. Kaya pasok sa paniniwala, pasok sila sa criteria. Kaya sila yung pinili natin. Next is quota sampling. It is the process of selecting sample based on required exact number or quotas or individuals or groups with varying characteristics. So, ito, kahit hindi na pasok sa criteria, si participant, kukunin mo siya kasi pang fill up dun sa number. Diba? Dito sa quota sampling, for example, 500 yung respondents na kailangan, pero ang nakuha mo lang is 420. So, yung 80 doon, ay, sige, yan na. Kinuha na, para lang mapunan yung 500. So, what are the samplings naman in qualitative research? So, qualitative sampling is the process or selecting a small number of individuals for a study in such a way that the individuals chosen will be good key informants. So, who will contribute to the researcher's understanding of a given phenomenon. So, the samples here in qualitative research is much different compared to quantitative research. Dito kasi mas smaller, mas less yung representatives or yung mga samples compared in quantitative. Diba? Dito, mas salang-sala din, mas piling-pili yung mga magpa-participate in the research. So, next is the samplings for qualitative research. So, we have actually 4. And first is the homogeneous sampling. So here, we select participants who are very similar in experience, perspectives, or outlook. So this produces a narrow, homogeneous sample and makes data collection and analysis simple. So here, we select a small group of participants who fit a narrow, homogeneous topic, collect from the chosen participants. For example, the required participant is the house husband, 'di ba? Yung mga father, 'di ba, na walang work at ang ano nila is yung household chores o yung sa bahay lang sila, 'di ba? So yun, homogeneous yun. Halimbawa kahit 5 or 6, 7, na they have similar experience of being a house husband. So that is homogeneous sampling. For example is women, barangay tanod, yung mga barangay tanod na babae. Diba? So, yun. O kaya, for example, judge, di ba? Judge sa korte, sa trial court. So, yun. Iilan-ilan lang naman yun. Di ba? So, yun yung tinatawag nating homogeneous sampling. So, kanina in homogeneous sampling, yung sample natin is they have just the same experiences. So, yun lang. Pero here in criterion sampling kasi, dapat swak yung lahat ng criteria doon sa participant. Kumbaga, na-attain, di ba? Or possess niya lahat ng criteria na yon para maging participant siya in that study. For example, kung sa homogeneous is just a science student in primsub. So, yun lang. Yun lang yung ano niya. Yung homogeneous. Pero in criterion, for example, science student, 4th year. Ang G1 niya ay 1.5 pataas. Tapos, meron siyang awards. So, yun yung criteria na kailangan niyang ma-comply bago siya maging participant. 'Di ba? For example, teacher, science teacher, babae, single, at dapat 10 to 15 years nang nagtuturo. At also, researcher siya. So, dapat ma-obtain niya lahat ng criteria na yun para maging participant siya. Yun yung tinatawag nating criterion sampling. And mas mahirap to compared dun sa other sampling in qualitative. Next is snowball sampling. So, medyo mas madali to compared dun sa mga nauna. Eto, basta sa tingin mong pasok sila, swak sila, then pwede mo na silang piliin. 'Di ba? Halimbawa, medyo na-comply niya naman yung ibang criteria. O siya na. Tapos yung napili mo, mamimili din siya ng kagaya niya. 'Di ba? Pwede rin siyang mag-recommend ng kagaya niya. Na possess yung other criterias to be a participant. Yun yung sinasabi natin, so snowball. So, ginagamit to kapag ang hirap maghanap ng participants na swak doon sa criteria mo. Next naman is random purposive sampling. So, dito meron a pool of potential participants. For example, yung pool of potential participants mo ay 25. Itong 25 na to, pasok sila sa criteria. Pero out of this 25, you will choose 10 only na sa tingin mo talagang makaka-comply sa needs ng study. Diba? For example, faculty. Sa loob ng PRIMSO faculty, for example. And in PRIMSO faculty, 50 doon ang nagre-research. So, 50 lang ang kukunin natin. For example, 50. So, sa 50 na yon, mamimili ka talaga na kung sino lang yung talagang sa tingin mo that could comply dun sa need ng study. For example, ang hinahanap mo is researcher faculty. So, sino-sino ba doon lang yung talagang out of 50, siguro 20 lang yung pipiliin mo na talagang may malaking magiging contribution sa results ng study mo. And this sampling adds credibility to your results. So, how can we determine the sampling in qualitative research? So, the qualitative researcher's time, money, participant availability, participants' interest, and other factors will influence the number of participants included in a research sample. So, the first is the extent to which the selected participants represent the range of potential participants in the setting. The second indicator is the redundancy of the information gathered from the participants or the data saturation. That's all for this topic. So if you have questions, you may post it in the comment section. So this is the reference of this presentation. And I wanted to thank my colleague, Ms. Carmel Casuga, a research professor, for preparing this slide presentation.